Hey, what's up, everybody? It's your man, Big O, down here, Africatown Media Networks, the check-in. And, we're checking in this evening with Emijah Smith. I think it's important. This is an impromptu, you know what I'm saying, kind of get together here. But with the day's developments, especially around the media and media narrative around you, thought that it was important to act expeditiously, as my man Tip would say, and, kind of talk to you about what's going on, but more importantly, to give you an opportunity to give the community some information about, like, man, who you really are and what you really got going on, because you're quiet by nature. It's an old saying that it's like empty barrels make a lot of noise. You know what I'm saying? There's a lot of substance going on with you, so you don't make a lot of noise. A lot of times people might not necessarily know, like, what's been happening. I preface that because, earlier today, KUOW, in an article that they published, the headline said that, like, you were battling demons, and then they had this artwork on the article that was, it was like a collage of, like, court documents and profanity-laden statements and everything else. And, in our community, when we hear the word demons, we're like, what? Was she on drugs? She was selling dope? You know what I'm saying? Because you're battling demons. That's a very, it's a very inflammatory term. And I mean, the artwork kind of complemented that as well. The KUOW outlined, an incident in your life, that occurred that actually impacts millions and millions of women like yourself nationally. And I think that one thing that KUOW didn't really, the narrative they came from, as opposed to saying that, like, you're battling demons, was the fact that you're actually a survivor and an overcomer. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about that?
My family safety was in jeopardy. A person was coming forward to perpetuate some dangerous situations. So we've overcome just experiences of trauma, sexual assault, and domestic violence. And we're survivors of that. And as a parent, as a mother, I just worked really hard and was very focused on making sure that not only was my family safe, but also that we are going to be successful and not give power to that situation. So all the actions moving forward from that incident was all about healing, restoration, and just being productive and active citizens that we are.
Wow. And I mean, I like what you just said right there. Like, you put power, in the situation of moving forward and positivity from them. And so, not to dwell on the past, I mean, because clearly KUOW already did that, you know what I'm saying? A lot of people really don't know about a lot of your accomplishments and what you've been doing since. Like you said, a traumatic experience occurred 7 years ago in the rearview mirror. And I know that since then that, I mean, you've been involved in a lot of different things, particularly around family, education, and everything else. I know one of the first things that really popped into my mind was the things that you've been doing around Black parent leadership. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Well, I just want to say, it's part of my history, just have my own experience as a young person in Seattle, growing up in the Central District. Graduating high school, very committed to saying education advocacy will provide opportunities to get ourselves out, have better opportunities, but also watching how that the war on drugs and the war in our community, I was like, I'm definitely committed to criminal justice reform, watching what happened in the criminalization of addiction and criminalization, just the laws, that's the predator laws, what have you. So my work and my activism has always been about how do I use policy to change the bad policy that created so much destruction and detriment in my community, as well as how do I utilize and access education. Now, our education system is set up not to really work for Black families in particular, Indigenous families, and marginalized communities. So instead of complaining about that situation, I'm like, let's get active and let's get in here and try to make change. So what I like to focus on is, what are some of the barriers inside the local schools? How do we make it more welcoming? How do we invite more families in there who feel like they're not welcome into this space? How do we strengthen school and family partnerships to where families feel like they are contributing and they have a voice at the school level, so that our students and our kids feel valued, feel loved, and want to be there and enjoy their learning experience? So some of the activities I personally have done is that if there's a school that doesn't have a parent resource night, open house. Okay, well, I'm going to organize families, try to find this money and figure out how do we get that there. We used to have more family support workers in our schools. We don't have that as much because of budgets. Okay, well, families like to know who's their mentor, who can they trust in the school. So trying to find those outlets, even if it's myself and I become that at the school, which oftentimes families rely on me for basic things like, where can I find hat and gloves? Where's a resource for housing? What should I do? My child was suspended. I'm like a walking network. But I'm not doing this alone. I'm doing this in solidarity with other community activists and parents who have shared vision and shared leadership.
Right, right. Now, you've also been on kind of the frontline advocacy and stopping the pipeline from, basically from the neighborhoods into the prison. And maybe you could talk a little bit about the work that you've done there to halt seem like the constant flow at times of our young men ending up, in the Department of Corrections.
Well, I've definitely been mentored. I would like to call out Mary Flowers, folks, the Black Prisoners Caucus, who have educated me to better understand what the process and the cycle looks like. So in learning from them and hearing what the issues are from the men who are incarcerated, as well as our youth who and families who are saying, my kids getting kicked out the classroom or we're being suspended for something. And again, I like to look at policy and processes and like, how do we fix this so that we can address whatever issues are happening to our community or to our students, but also how do we do it in a way that makes sense and is not punitive. So some of the actions that I do is I'm an advisor on the Seattle King County Discipline Coalition, where we actually provide workshops and trainings for families to better understand their rights. We provide students the opportunity to understand their rights, and we go to Olympia and advocate on the state level to say, parent input needs to be they need to have their voice at the table when you're making decisions and policies about what school discipline would look like. We like to look at how the racial equity or inequities are happening around discipline outcomes and how that's playing into high school graduations. And in addition to that, if I'm hearing that there's a policy on the state level, we need to go speak with our state legislators, then I'm going to organize some folks, professionals, experts, families. Let's go to Olympia and let's have this conversation so that we can move things forward and build relationships with the leadership in our at our Capitol.
Right. And what is it about policy change? The thing is that change as a whole, it's impacted by lots of different aspects, and sometimes that aspect is being loud in the streets, and sometimes other people are in media like myself, and then there's policy. How did you end up on the policy side of things?
Well, to be honest, just having average jobs and doing direct service in the community, if you're at the bottom of the totem pole, oftentimes your voice doesn't matter. So I decided to go ahead and get my college degree and then a master's degree in public administration that really does focus on policy, analyze policy, implement policy. So I educated myself, and then I was able to get career opportunities that allowed me to see that to move forward. So my current employer I worked for the past 10 years, we do policy on the state level, and we literally look at legislation, or we literally talk to folks and say, how do we develop legislation? But I also want to give credit to community folks. Myself and two other Black women, we started a coalition or collective called Black Out Washington, where we actually ourselves would say, let's look at some policy. How do we create our own legislation and go to a legislator and say, can you sponsor this? And how do we bring voice from a grassroots level, from a community level, to say this is how this really impacts our community?
Right. My mom always says that policy, she's like, change it really occurs in the ink on paper is at the policy level, right?
Yes.
Right. So, I mean, clearly, the school board today, they made their decision to fill the District 7 seat. But I kind of get the feeling, though, that it's like, yeah, and, what's next? You know what I'm saying? You didn't get selected, you know what I'm saying? But I get a feeling that that's not stopping you. I mean, you have all these things going on and everything else. But what's on the horizon for you? What are some of the things that you're working on or upcoming?
Well, throughout this process of putting my name in the hat for the school board appointmentship, I have built much stronger community relationships. And community outside of the Black community have come to me and said, we don't care if you or the director or not, we know about your work. We've heard about your reputation. So what's on the horizon for me is to continue to build bonds, to continue to be a voice that's present. Just because I didn't get the appointmentship doesn't mean I walk away and then leave our kids behind. That's not how this works. You have to be committed. It's not for the weak or the weary. Life experiences has shown me as a survivor that I'm strong. I can speak truth to power, and that I'm a force to be reckoned with. So I want to use those attributes of myself to bring more community voice to the table, to continue to bring transparency around this process, because I just personally not want to fail my own children who are in Seattle public schools, but I don't want to fail the other children who are marginalized and need support.